Ilyana from Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn is a fan favorite character. The cute, shy girl with a healthy appetite has wormed her way into many people's hearts. Whether it's because of her great design, the hungry girl gimmick, or the support where she sucks on Maya's toes, and no, I'm not making that up for a bit, that's actually in Path of Radiance. Ilyana just has a way of worming her way into people's hearts. But unfortunately, in FE9, she doesn't have a lot going for her as a unit. In Tellius, mages are one of the weakest classes out there, so she's already at a disadvantage, but if you wanted to use a mage on your squad, Soren joins earlier, Tormod has the funny movement gimmick, and Khalil and Bastion come pre-built. The only thing Ilyana has going for her is Shade, which in theory sounds like it would be good on a squishy glass cannon, but in practice, the way that Shade works doesn't end up stopping enemies from attacking her in most situations. It basically just trips a flag that makes it so that all enemies think that she can counter, but she already can counter all enemies, so it doesn't really do that much for her. Even just looking at Ilyana and Soren's growth side by side is a very sad picture. But we're not here to talk about FE9 Ilyana, because in Fire Emblem 10, she had a second chance at success. And while many people label her as a trash tier unit, I think that's a bit of an oversimplification. As while she's unlikely to be useful in endgame, Ilyana does have legitimate contributions in what I consider to be the hardest portion of the game, the Dawn Brigade chapters. But before we go any further, this video is part of an ongoing series where I take a close look at the individual members of the Dawn Brigade and evaluate them from a gameplay perspective. I do plan on covering almost all of the units that join during part 1 of Radiant Dawn, and my patrons will be voting on the order in which I do so. So if you want to let your voice be heard, there's a link down below. Please only donate if you can afford it, yada yada yada. While you're down there, like, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. Plug out of the way, now we can talk about Hungry Girl. Ilyana joins in Chapter 1-3 as a level 12 Thunder Mage. Her base stats make it pretty clear what she wants to do. With 22 HP and 3 defense, she's not tanking too many hits. On the flip side, 12 magic and 13 speed means that she can pretty easily slot into the glass cannon role, especially since mages can attack from 1-2 range. Meaning that if she doesn't want to, Ilyana doesn't have to face a counter. Unfortunately, Ilyana is held back by Thunder Magic. In Path of Radiance, it was actually the strongest anima type, but since all 3 mages could use any type of magic, it didn't really benefit Ilyana that she technically specialized in Thunder. Here, her specialization in Thunder does matter, because each mage on Tier 1 can only use one magic type, but in a cruel twist of fate, Thunder has been heavily nerfed. Now instead of being the highest might of the magic types, it is instead the lowest might and lowest accuracy, but instead it gets a little bit of crit. And by a little bit, I do truly mean only a little bit. The Thunder Tome that Ilyana starts with her inventory has 5 crit, and El Thunder has 10. These stats are really not worth the drawback of using a 3 might 80 hit weapon. And the hit is important because enemies in Radiant Dawn are going to be somewhat avoided. On her join map, Ilyana frequently pulls between 70 and 80% hit rates, depending on her and the enemy's biorhythm. And on the higher difficulties, missing crucial attacks can be deadly. Combine this with the fact that even when Ilyana doubles armors the lowest resistance enemies in the game, she does not one-round them, and it's not looking good for our girl. In contrast, Micaiah pulls perfect accuracy on most enemies and will one-shot Cavaliers and Armors while dealing significant damage to other enemies with her Thani bombs. That being said, if you've seen my video on Micaiah, then you'll know that I think being a second but worse version of her is still pretty good, and it's not like Ilyana is strictly worse than Micaiah. The Maiden of Miracles is famously frail. Many enemies will one-shot her, and in fact, in 1-2, she needs to get an HP level up in order to not get one-rounded by every enemy on the map. You can pretty easily prevent her from dying with clever positioning, but it is undeniably a downside when a unit cannot enemy phase. As previously highlighted, Ilyana isn't exactly a tank, but she can pretty reliably eat exactly one attack on her join map. which means that she can fight archers over the wall or afford to wall off a position in order to eat one attack from a soldier. This doesn't sound like a huge bulk threshold, and I'll be honest, it kind of isn't, but it is a utility that she has that Micaiah does not. The early game Dawn Brigade takes all the help it can get. I wouldn't say that she's the most useful unit on 1-3, that title obviously goes to Soth, and I still prefer Nolan and Micaiah over Ilyana on Ilyana's join map, but helping to wear down armors and other enemies with inaccurate chip is still useful. At least she's better than Edward and Leonardo. And, much like I said with Micaiah, Ilyana can attack the Laguz safely without being countered, which again is very valuable, because the Laguz in Chapter 1-4 hit very hard. Combine this with the plethora of walls and 1 tie-wide choke points, and it's nice to be a 2-range unit on 1-4. Sure, Ilyana's not going to be as accurate as Micaiah or Leonardo, but she's going to be doing more damage than Leonardo, and well, no, her increased bulk doesn't actually help her on this map. She's getting one-rounded as often as Micaiah is. Micaiah is just better. But at this stage of the game, being worse than Micaiah is not exactly a nightmare. And even in 1-5, Ilyana can be useful. Volug and Soth do the majority of the heavy lifting on this map, but I typically send them off on solo missions, so it's up to the rest of the Scrub Squad to take on any units that might threaten them. Once again, attacking from 2 range is nice, although Ilyana's accuracy is going to be pretty bad unless you forge her a more accurate Thunder Tome. Honestly, oftentimes I will forge a Thunder Tome and just increase hit but not might, and I think it's a worthwhile investment. If you have the funds for it, increasing might helps because, god, the might of Thunder Tomes is awful, but forging tomes is expensive, and Radiant Dawn, unlike Path of Radiance, does not give you infinite money. But after that, Jill, Zyhark, and Tyronio show up, and there's a cascading domino of very strong units. It becomes increasingly difficult to justify deploying Ilyana. If you just want to beat the maps, then Zyhark and Tormod Squad are going to do the job better. And if you want to train units, well, Ilyana leaves the Dawn Brigade after Part 1, so Nolan and Jill are much better investment projects. Heck, even the scrubs like Aaron and Meg will at least be around for the hard Part 3 chapters. That's more than you can say for Hungry Girl. So with her as an easy candidate for bench fodder for the remainder of Part 1, I can understand why so many people think that Ilyana is bad. But it's important to remember that the endgame is not the only part of the game that matters. It doesn't matter if Zyhark outclasses Ilyana in 1-6, if you need her help to reach 1-6, then she has also contributed. A lot of people only apply this logic to Jagans, but there are plenty of early game units who don't scale well into the late game, but are still worth using in the early game. Units like Walt, Dolga, Brighton, and I would argue Ilyana from Radiant Dawn belong in this category. And I think these units ought to be respected. I understand that a lot of Fire Emblem players are hesitant to give chip or kills to the units that they're not planning on using long term, but in most games, EXP is not so tight that you need to only get kills with people who are going to be a part of your endgame team. Radiant Dawn is one of the games where the EXP distribution is tight enough that I do think it's wise to select a small number of training projects to raise up during Part 1, but even then, Ilyana is useful so that those projects don't, well, die while they're training. And when I initially planned out the Ilyana video, that's all I was going to talk about. But then I got to talking to some people about the early game of Radiant Dawn, and they suggested a different strategy for Ilyana's early game. One that opens up her potential to be one of the stronger units in your army throughout the Dawn Brigade arc. And, well, I had to investigate this. The strategy is to promote Ilyana as soon as possible with the first Master Seal in the game. You get access to it in Chapter 1-4, but it is a hidden item and therefore chance-based, so I think the most realistic time to consistently have a promoted Ilyana is in Chapter 1-5. Promotion gives her the obvious benefit of stat gains, but it also lets her use non-thunder magic types, and she gains additional capacity to equip more skills. For anyone who hasn't played Radiant Dawn, the skill system in that game works a little bit different than modern Fire Emblems. Here, each character has a certain amount of capacity, and each skill has a capacity volume attached to it. Any skill that a character starts with, they have equipped for 0 capacity. But if you remove a skill from a character, you can equip it to someone else as long as they have the available capacity. So if there's a skill that costs 10 capacity and a unit has 20 capacity available, they can equip the 10 capacity skill and an additional 10 capacity skill in order to meet their maximum of 20. In general, skills that are more powerful, such as Wrath and Resolve, cost more capacity. And as you promote, you gain more capacity based on being in promoted classes. Because the majority of the Dawn Brigade starts out in Tier 1 classes, a lot of skills are too high capacity for them to equip if they don't start with it by default. Specifically, Wrath and Resolve, which as mentioned are very powerful skills, can only be equipped by Tier 2 or Tier 3 units, as well as Micaiah, who starts out with some extra capacity as a benefit of her unique class. Because you can equip and unequip skills at any time, the logic is if you give Ilyana these skills for short-term benefits, you can always unequip them later and give them to your long-term units in order to let them make use of them in the endgame. Now, the Master Seal that you use is a permanent form of investment, and since Ilyana is a short-term unit, you might think it's a bit of a waste. After all, there's a limited number of Master Seals in the game. You get access to 4 for free and can buy an additional 2 for a total of 6. But because of Radiant Dawn's unique class system, most units actually don't need to use Master Seals. You see, in Radiant Dawn, each class line has 3 tiers. Tier 1 units can use the Master Seals to promote to Tier 2, and Tier 2 units can use the Master Crown to promote to Tier 3. Additionally, if you ever hit level 21, you just automatically promote to the next tier, at least in the English version. It works slightly differently in the Japanese version, but because my audience is primarily English speaking, I'm going to assume that the English version of Radiant Dawn is what we're playing. The only units in the game who start in a Tier 1 class are Edward, Leonardo, Nolan, Lara, Ilyana, Aaron, Meg, Fiona, and Jill. That's 9 units compared to a total of 6 Master Seals. Meg and Fiona are largely joke units. You can use them if you want, but you're probably memeing. Lara is a unit I like a lot, but she can accomplish everything you want her to at base. She's a staff bot out of 10. And despite dedicated fan bases for Edward and Aaron, I think the majority of Fire Emblem fans would agree that these are not particularly top tier units. That leaves us with only Nolan, Leonardo, Ilyana, and Jill as units who join in Tier 1 and can legitimately benefit from Master Seals, which conveniently is 4 units, matching the number of free Master Seals you get. Even if you disagree with me and think that Aaron or Meg are top tier threats, there's 2 more to spare. You can spend the money for an extra Master Seal and not feel too put out by early promoting Ilyana. There's also an argument to be made that due to Ilyana's unique army swapping abilities, promoting her to open up new capacity for skills so she can transport a skill scroll to the Grail Mercenaries is legitimately a good investment on its own, even if you don't plan on using her for combat after promotion. It's something that I've done many times when I wanted to give either Pass or Savior to the Grail Mercenaries. I guess I should explain how that works. Ilyana will leave the Dawn Brigade at the end of Part 1 and join the Grail Mercenaries. Any items in her inventory or skills that are equipped to her capacity also get brought with her. So if you fill her inventory with items the Grail Mercenaries want, and her skill slots with skills the Grail Mercenary wants, then you can provide a boon to Ike and his army. It is worth noting that even if you don't promote Ilyana, you can put skills as scrolls in her inventory, but you can save inventory space if you're able to equip them via her capacity. So with all of that out of the way, I don't think it's a waste to give Ilyana the first Master Seal. The only other unit who might want it is Nolan, but this hurts his long-term potential, which I think is a little bit more important than the short-term stat boost he gets from promoting in 1-4. But how does instant promoted Ilyana perform in the Dawn Brigade chapters? Well, as much as multiple friends of mine hyped her up, I don't think she performs particularly well. Before I tried instant promoting her, my impression of Ilyana was that she is a second but strictly worse version of Micaiah. Now that I've tried instant promoting her, I think that she is a second, mostly worse version of Micaiah. For all the reasons I explained earlier, this is a fine place to be, but it was pretty disappointing considering how much I had this hyped up. The biggest benefit that I saw is when you instant promote Ilyana, she's able to live a hit in Chapter 1-5, which is something that is not true of unpromoted Ilyana. Being able to survive one round of combat also means that she's prime for setting up skills like Wrath and Resolve, since usually the enemies will knock her down into the range where these are active. On 1-5, the only one you have access to is Wrath, and I'll be honest, I think that this one is a lot worse. Wrath is a very all or nothing skill, and since she can't set up to get to 100% crit, I don't think it's particularly beneficial, especially since Ilyana either wants to be a player phase delete button or a player phase chip button. The inherent unreliability of Wrath means that you can't set up chip for units who you want to get experience on, but you also can't always delete enemies who you need dead now. Now, once you get to 1-6, you gain access to Resolve, which can more reliably allow Ilyana to get kills. If she is in Resolve range, she often doubles enemies and she two-shots them, so, you know, that's pretty good. And even in 1-6 and 1-7, a promoted Ilyana will regularly survive rounds of combat in order to perfectly set up for a Resolve sweep. The problem is that this comes in 1-6. At this point in the campaign, you have access to Volug, Soth, Tyronio, and Zyhark, all of whom do very good combat on their own. Moreover, Jill, Micaiah, and Nolan will also do decent combat, and Nolan, Jill, and Zyhark all appreciate getting a lot of experience. While EXP management is not so tight that you need to feed every kill to your training projects, it is still a very good idea to try to get as many levels on those 3 units as possible. And if you want to look even further, Volug wants to at least see combat so he can raise his strike rank. Whether it's chip or kills doesn't really make a difference for him, but let's be honest, Volug is probably killing anything that he attacks. If you're investing Resolve and a Forge into Ilyana just so she can get kills, it feels a little bit counterproductive. After all, there are other units who could benefit from that experience far more than her. That's right, Ilyana has now turned into the worst thing you can possibly be, an EXP thief, but kind of unironically. The extra sad thing about Ilyana's fate is her weapon access. You see, once Ilyana promotes into Sage, she gains access to Fire and Wind Tomes, although unfortunately not Staves. Those are locked to Archmage, which is the Tier 3 promotion. Since Thunder is by far the worst school of magic, being able to use Fire and Wind benefits her. Except for Ilyana isn't able to use Fire and Wind because the shops won't sell them. Presumably because they assume you're only going to have a Thunder Mage, the only tomes available are Light and Thunder tomes. Once you recruit Tormod, you get Fire tomes in the shop, but at that point, just use Tormod as your Sage, right? Like, I know he's only going to be around for 3 more maps, but the same is true of Ilyana. In fairness, you could hashtag just use both, but deployment slots are very tight on the swamp map, and in endgame, it's easier to fit Ilyana on the team, but she is noticeably worse at her job than Tormod is. Overall, I wouldn't consider instant promoting Ilyana to be a failure of an experiment. In fact, I'm going to be doing it in every future playthrough of Radiant Dawn, but I don't think it improves her by as much as you might think. She still needs a Forge to improve her accuracy and probably also her might. She's less consistent at killing Armor Knights than Micaiah is, due to needing to set up with Resolve or Wrath, and by the time that her build finally comes online, you have so many people that perform better than her for free that it's hard to look at her as being a powerful part of your army, especially if you're trying to train even one of the multiple training projects in Part 1's campaign. Of course, there is a third option. You could just make Ilyana into the training project. Sure, she's not going to come back in Part 3's Dawn Brigade chapters, but she does eventually join the Grail Mercenaries. If you feed her a bunch of experience, either unpromoted or promoted with the Paragon skill, you can potentially get her to the point where she is a powerful mage in Ike's army. And from there, you can continue to get the snowball rolling so that you have an Archsage worthy of being brought into the tower. She is the only person capable of wielding Rexbolt, the S+ Thunder Tome. And while Thunder magic is incredibly bad for the majority of the campaign, in endgame specifically, there's a map composed of entirely dragon enemies. Ilyana will therefore deal effective damage to all of them. But I won't beat around the bush. There's multiple reasons I think this is bad. As far as the tower is concerned, you get a bunch of really strong units right before you enter the tower. The Laguz Royals are the ones that stand out the most, but there's also plenty of pre-promotes who can do the job better than Ilyana would, even if she were trained up. I'm not a fan of mages in Radiant Dawn, but if that's what you want, Bastion and Oliver are right there. Bastion can even use lightning magic to deal effective damage. And Sanaki and Micaiah enter the tower for free. You've got plenty of mages, you don't need to train Ilyana for that. Moreover, even if all you want is a powerful mage for Ike's army, you get Soren before Ilyana rejoins. With the hard mode EXP gain, it is very unlikely for Ilyana to approach Soren's raw stats. And I'm not even a huge fan of Soren in Radiant Dawn. In addition to Radiant Dawn mages being pretty bad, Soren himself is quite slow. You wouldn't expect it from a wind mage, but he actually has a lower speed growth than all of the non-Braum armor knights. I'm not saying it's impossible to train Ilyana to the point that she's usable in Ike's army, but I think it runs counter to the goal of beating the game. In my opinion, the Part 3 Dawn Brigade maps are some of the hardest in the campaign, and as a result, I think you should spend at least some of the Part 1 chapters preparing for those maps. Whether you're training up Nolan and Jill, feeding Zyhark experience, or getting strike rank on Volug, you are making progress towards beating the Part 3 maps. By training Ilyana, you sacrifice Micaiah's army for Ike's army, and Ike's army doesn't need the help. They get Har, they get Titania, they get Ike. These are some of the best units in the game. The fact that Mia is one of the middle of the pack units in the Grail Mercenaries, despite being statistically identical to Zyhark, who is arguably the best member of the Dawn Brigade, should speak volumes about the quality of units in the two different armies. So yeah, I don't think long-term Ilyana is a particularly good idea either. But I don't want to end the video on something negative. Ilyana deserves to be celebrated. Even if you don't early promote her, she can contribute by setting up kills for Nolan and Jill. And if you promote her and make her a forge, she can set up for those kills more accurately, or if necessary, get kills herself in order to keep the army alive. It's not the most glamorous job out there, but it is nonetheless important, and Ilyana deserves our respect and recognition for it. Plus, just as a reminder, again, in Path of Radiance, she canonically sucks Maya's toes, so, you know, that's pretty cool too. But you know who else is pretty cool? My patrons! So, thank you to Michael Kraus, Maren McLean, Len, Calamity Callie, Gameboo, Queen Elizam, Carosa, Adele, Fyrant, Thaythom, Smaz Ruby, Andu, Reflect, Azel Rosenberg, Jamie Collins, Tailored Muffin, Mean Jojo, George Granville 7th PM, Thick Molder, SUP, Arvis, Caius Cole, Bell Wenska, Gabe the Green, Dysike, Control Aegis, Ginger, Joanna the Wrench Witch, Root Beer Pants, Roman Kormansik, and especially my Jagans, Autumn Kelsey, Julia Kyoto, and Nick Knack Hammersmack. If you would like to support the channel financially, there is a link to my Patreon below. You'll get your name up here, early videos, and a couple of other benefits depending on the tier. But please, only donate if you can comfortably afford to do so. I don't want anyone going broke over Fire Emblem. Free ways to support the channel include liking, subscribing, and commenting on the video. Speaking of which, today's comment code word is Dire Thunder. If you include Dire Thunder in your comment, then I'll know you made it to the end of the video. But regardless of what you choose to do, I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe, gamers.